Thank you, Mr. Speaker. New Zealand is facing what may well be an unprecedented attack on state and social services. Just this past weekend, we found out from the Minister of Social Development that she's open to considering Serco, and we must assume other transnational corporations, to provide community care for our most vulnerable children, young people, as well as victims and survivors of domestic and sexual violence. Serco, the company who's running Mount Eden Prison, which has the highest inmate-on-inmate violence in the country, according to a recent UN report. Serco, that in early audits was found to have failed to reach 40% of its targets. But this isn't an isolated announcement. This is part of a pattern of implementation of an ideology of this government. Last week, we found out that the government is looking at using people accessing mental health services as a cash cow for their mates in the form of social bonds, a model where businesses are encouraged to invest in the provision of something that we used to consider a core function of government, a role, a service for some of the most vulnerable people in this country, to be able to turn this into an opportunity for profit for a business is this government's agenda. And only 2 weeks ago, we saw the largest counselling provider in this country close their doors because of funding pressures, after having been required to cut $4.5 million from their operating budget. This is a service that had existed since World War II. Relationships Aotearoa, who has been quite blithely criticised by this government without a chance for them to be able to stand up and defend their good name. And I must say, from what I heard in the community, was roundly positive for that organisation. But no, that is not what the government said. They have just been happy to see them close. And these three cases are part of just another stage of a significant attack on services. We've seen Child, Youth and Family operating under a differential response model for a while, where 2/3 of notifications for Child, Youth and Family are put out to the community organisations that are struggling to survive, organisations whose staff members haven't had a pay rise in 6 years, who are saying that their skills are undervalued, that they're struggling to cope with the massive increase in complexity of the cases that they see. Children, like we have seen in front of the courts in Auckland this week, because the government is reducing their role in providing these essential social services. We've also now seen a review of Child, Youth and Family. Rather than a response to the reports that are telling us they've been underfunded and understaffed for a long time, we have a review happening headed by Paula Redstock. And we've seen functions of work and income also contracted out to the community and businesses who no longer under the same level of democratic scrutiny. We can't see what's going on. It's much harder to get the stories from those communities to be able to hold the government to account. And now we hear the government's better public service model is going to be applied onto our community sector. Whereas before, the community used to identify their needs, do the research, come together as people and provide the best responses. Now the government's going to be reducing their funded work down to this government's political goals, not the democratic political needs of that community. And it's part of the sale of state houses into the community, privatisation of prisons, ACC contracts going to businesses, Australian insurance companies, picking up services that for specialist sexual violence services, charter schools. The list goes on. This is a comprehensive, unprecedented attack on the role of the state and undermining of our communities. And it is something that this country should be very, very wary of. We're being told it's all about better services, but this is the most significant and pernicious political agenda we have seen in decades.
Mr. Speaker.